Welcome to the video. Today I'm here with Heather, the mother of a child with Down syndrome. Keep watching to watch our interview. Okay, thanks so much for being on here.
Of course, thanks for asking.
Yeah, so can you first tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so I am a professor and I have two little boys, a 12 and 9-year-old. And I think today we'll mostly be talking about my 9-year-old who has Down syndrome. And we live near Chicago and we're a pretty active family.
So how did you find out your son has Down syndrome? And can you describe your initial feelings when you first found out?
Yeah, absolutely. So nowadays, I think most pregnant women around, or I should say, birthing people around 20 weeks of gestation will get a blood test. And the blood test will give you usually sort of like what likelihood might the child have Down syndrome. And then if it's a high likelihood, they do follow-up tests. And so we knew that he was going to have Down syndrome pretty early on in the pregnancy, which in hindsight, I feel like was really great because that gave us a lot of time to prepare.
Yeah.
However, it was kind of scary because there wasn't a lot of information out there. And I don't think we realized how much access he would have to services and supports. And so that was our biggest fear, is just that he wouldn't have that kind of access to services and supports that could optimize his development, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So how much did you know about Down syndrome before?
So I probably knew more than the average person just because of my training in psychology, because I was trained in psychology. But I still didn't know much about sort of the day-to-day or the practical implications. I sort of knew the general, it's a chromosomal genetic condition, it's really common, there's different associated features like facial features, low muscle tone. So from that knowledge, I was a little bit worried about whether he would have, what his muscle tone, meaning what would his sort of strength be as a newborn to be able to feed and specifically breastfeed. So those are things sort of front in my mind. And then of course I was worried about, as he develops, what are the resources he would need and how would I get those? But that was my primary concern. So we made sure that the hospital had a lactation consultant, and we had that set up so that when he was born, there would be somebody right there to kind of help guide us.
Oh, wow.
But he didn't end up needing that. He ended up being fine in terms, I mean, he does have the low muscle tone. That's just a feature that most people with Down syndrome have, but it didn't seem to impact his feeding at that point. Later on it did, for sure. We got feeding therapy. But I think one of the biggest things about Down syndrome that's important is that they're just as different as typically developing kids, neurotypical, I should say. They have, there's just as much variety. And so while there are certain things that might be common because of low muscle tone or because of delays, developmental delays, there's still a very wide spectrum in terms of what kids. So it's always great to have something prepared, but it's always also nice to know that people are learning more and more about Down syndrome every day, so that professionals can be more prepared to meet their needs.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So as you said, you have two sons, your oldest who doesn't have Down syndrome and your youngest who does. How do you feel your approach to parenting is different or similar for your two sons? Or has it just evolved over time?
Yeah, I would definitely say it has evolved over time. And I think the different approaches, we've really learned from them. Like what works best for them, what helps them to be successful. And I think the only difference from a parenting perspective about having a little boy with Down syndrome is that some of his behaviors are more driven by a sensory need, so needing more sensory input or less sensory input, similar to kids with autism, I think. But I think people don't always think about that when they think of Down syndrome. And so that was a little bit of a learning curve for us, because when a behavior is being driven by a sensory need, it doesn't always respond the same way to sort of evidence-based parenting interventions the way attention-seeking behavior or disruptive behavior does. And so that was different. But otherwise, I would say our different approaches, it would be just the same as if you just had two neurotypical kids who had different personalities. It's very similar to that. They just have very different personalities.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned while being a parent of a child with Down syndrome?
The biggest lessons I would say is that it's way more common than I realized.
Yeah.
The community is amazing. There's so many resources now. And I think part of that is because it is so common. Gigi's Playhouse was really helpful for us. And my only wish is that I had learned about it sooner.
So many people say that.
Yeah, I wish I had known about it when he was very, very little, because I think he was maybe 4 or 5 when we found out about it. So it has but even then, we've benefited from a lot of their services. The National Association for Down Syndrome has been really helpful. They were really helpful right after birth to kind of soothe our worries. They somehow connected with us right away. And then early intervention has been really helpful. So I think just having all those resources for any parents expecting a child with Down syndrome, it's great to just get involved right away, because you don't even know what you don't know in some ways, and they help you to kind of navigate that path.
That's awesome that you found like all of these resources.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, and a shout out to Down in the Southland too. They're sort of like a group that was created by and run by parents of kids with Down syndrome, and really promotes community inclusiveness. And so that has also been a really big support for us too.
Wow, yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges with raising a child with Down syndrome in today's world?
So I would say a big challenge is that there's still a lot of disparity in terms of health outcomes, in terms of access. So we happen to live in an area where we have access to a Gigi's Playhouse, and we have access to the National Association of Down Syndrome, and we have access to Down in the Southland. But there's a lot. We used to live in a place where it was a little harder to get that access. And so I think there's still disparities in terms of where people live.
Yeah.
And then the school system. So our school system also has a lot of really great educational resources, and our early intervention was really strong, but not every community has the same quality. Yeah. So I think there's still disparities in that. And then I think public awareness is also developing in that kids seem to be very understanding of my son's needs. Yeah. And that has been really refreshing. So I guess we've sort of been lucky in that way, but I recognize that not everybody has that experience. So I guess my biggest thing would be that I wish there was more equity across all regions and all families, so that everybody could feel the support that we've been able to feel.
Yeah. So you talked about this before, like just now, about all the resources that you found. Can you explain a little bit more, like exactly what resources you found and how that's changed your experience?
Yeah. So one thing that I really liked about Gigi's Playhouse is they have these like different developmental groups that sort of support certain things that the child might be doing in early intervention or at school, but they really support you in providing that at home. So for example, when he was really little, we used to come to this group that really supported like speech and OT. And it was really great to get some like more creative ideas how to integrate that into just our daily life. Then when he got a little older, he had this like one-on-one tutoring for literacy. And then when he got a little bit older, we did one-on-one tutoring for math. And we really saw, I think the biggest thing is, even though I think we need to be realistic about our children's progress, speed of progress, I think what really was great for us is it really cultivated that love of actually learning, that love of doing the literacy activities, doing the math activities, because we had a really great tutor who really made it fun for him. And so it wasn't like, oh, I'm sitting down and I'm doing my math. It was like, we are going to count these bean bags as we throw them into the basket. And we're going to count these balloons as we throw them around or whatever. And I think or snowballs, I think we did once. I'm trying to remember. But and so I think that was a piece that was like really great, because as a parent, you can get really busy and overwhelmed, especially if you're working full time. So to have a tutor come in with these really great ideas just was just wonderful for us. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
So, from my understanding, your son does a bunch of different activities like go to school, or take a gymnastics class, get receiving tutoring from Gigi's Playhouse. Can you describe a little bit more about the kinds of activities he does and how you found out what works best for him?
Yeah, so he's in swimming, and he's been in swimming for a long time. And we knew early on that he was drawn to water. He loved water, he loved his bath, he loved playing in water, and he had no fear of water. So we knew it's pretty critical early on that he learned how to swim. And so that has been a core component of him. We also learned pretty early on that he has a really high need for like a lot of activity. Not all kids with Down syndrome do, and so you want to kind of see what makes sense for them. But as a baby, before he had more stamina, he would get worn out really easy, and then he'd be tired and cranky, and so trying to get him to do more was not successful. But as he started to develop more stamina, we were able to see like, oh, he needs more activities. So it sounds like he's doing a lot now, but he's 9. When he was a baby, he maybe had one activity, not a baby, but when he was a little guy, like 4 to 6, he maybe had one activity. Yeah. And it was always on a weekend because school would wear him out. So he would, and we were working full time. So he would go to school, and then he'd go to like daycare or after school. And so by the time he got home, he was like dinner in bed. Like because of the low muscle tone, he gets worn out. But now that he's gotten older, he's a very active kid. So he's still in swimming, and he also loves stunts. Loves watching stunts, hearing about stunts, watching movies with stunts. So we got him in gymnastics, and he loves it. He loves doing gymnastics, and it's just like a physicality for his body. And it's great too, because a lot of the PTs really designed to strengthen certain muscles and core and stabilizing muscles. So gymnastics and swimming almost are doing double duty for him.
Yeah.
It's a fun activity that he loves, and it's kind of strengthening his core and his stabilizing muscles. There are other activities we've tried that haven't gone as well. So we tried ice skating, but I think it's just too much different coordinating things.
Yeah.
So he's not a big fan of that. So we just kind of followed his direction. We would love to get him to ride a bike because we think he would, but the bike riding is also really hard because one of the things kids with Down syndrome sometimes have difficulty with is coordinating multiple movements. Mm-hmm. So with bike riding, you have to do the pedaling, you have to do the balancing, and you have to do the steering. Yeah. So it's a lot. So we've been trying to focus on, he's got a little bike right now. It's like a 3-wheeler that looks like a big wheel, if you know what those look like. So it's kind of like you sit in it like a car, and the steering comes back, but you pedal.
Oh yeah.
So you only have to worry about the pedaling and the steering. You don't really have to balance because the seat has a back, like it's like a seat, like a chair. And then I'm trying to think what else he's done, like things like tutoring, and he does things with the park district.
Oh, nice.
So that is another thing that's sort of like, it depends on your area. Yeah. So some park districts that we've been a part of wouldn't take him because of his higher level of need. But now we're at a place where the park district has like special aids for kids with disabilities, so he can do park district things. It's more inclusive. So that's something that I would encourage parents. If you have a kid, you'd like them to try park district activities, you can enroll in other areas' park districts. You just have to, you might have a different registration date, or there might be a slightly different fee because the taxes from that area are paying that park district. But I would encourage people to look into it if they have the funds, because it's a nice way to expand your options for kids.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. Yeah. I haven't heard about that before. Yeah. What is something you wish people knew about Down syndrome besides everything you've already shared already?
That's a good one. I think I wish, or I hope people know how full their lives are and can be, and that a lot of times any limitations that we're putting on them are might be from the perspective of outdated information, and that we just really focus on enjoying the people in our lives with Down syndrome or in our communities with Down syndrome for who they are as individuals, and recognizing that they have all kinds of different gifts and talents, just like people without Down syndrome, that there is no difference there. And that they are just an amazing part of our community.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I love that. That's a very nice way you put it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, finally, what are some of your favorite memories with your son?
I would say there's two main ones. One is just whenever he laughs and giggles and three, yeah. Laughs and giggles and finds something funny. He just like brightens up the room. Two, when he makes jokes, like he's hilarious. And I just love when he like finds this clever way of thinking about something or looking at something or making this connection that I hadn't seen before. And I'm just like, wow, buddy, yeah. And then I would say my third one is just how loving he is. And he's like a little celebrity in our town. Like people will be walking down the street and people will be like, they'll know him. And I'm always sort of like, feel a little bit weird. Like, how do you know him? How do you know my son? But he's just lives such a full life that he impacts people that he may have met once and then they remember him. And so my husband went to eat at a restaurant the other day, like by himself, and they were like, "Oh, you're this boy's dad." Like they knew he was the dad of our son. It was just sort of like, and so that makes us feel great. Like people know who he is and are happy. And well, I guess four things. And then the fourth thing is like when he advocates for himself. Like he's a very strong self-advocate. And sometimes that can look a little bit like defiance, but I think it's important for us to remember that he's gonna be independent one day and he has preferences. And our job, I think, as parents is to help him advocate for himself in an appropriate way. Yeah. And so it's great when I see him. He's only 9, so he might not always use the most diplomatic skills, but the fact that he feels empowered to advocate for himself and his needs and his wants, I think is really a great place for him to be right now.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It's been great hearing like a parent perspective and just a bunch of cool information that I'm sure like our viewers would like have loved hearing. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for asking me.
Thanks so much for watching.
We hope you learned something new about Down syndrome today.